half an hour.
This boy grew up to be a serial killer.
The best prediction for future behavior is past behavior.
But what are the early signs?
These people are serious, they're sick.
Can animal cruelty
He was bored.
predict human brutality?
Those who have established a pattern of violence against animals certainly should be viewed as being at higher risk.
Panorama examines the cruelty connection, Monday at 10 on BBC One.
The 9 o'clock news now on BBC One with Peter Sissons.
The man who had the job of warning the public about the risks of BSE has revealed there was an official attempt to play the crisis down. The former chief medical officer says he stopped the Agriculture Ministry putting out reassurances that didn't fit the facts. America's envoy spells out to Yugoslavia one more time the terms for avoiding airstrikes over Kosovo. And an extra punishment for Paul Ince will keep him from playing for England until next June. Good evening. At the height of the BSE scare, he was often on television spelling out for the public the possible risk. But today, Sir Kenneth Calman claimed that the key government department involved was trying to play down the crisis. Sir Kenneth, who was the government's chief medical officer at the time, said that on one occasion he had to stop the Ministry of Agriculture putting out reassuring publicity that didn't fit with the scientific evidence. In his submission to the BSE inquiry, he also says he was astonished to discover that potentially contaminated offal was still getting into the food chain 6 years after it was banned.
Sir Kenneth Calman was one of the most important people involved in the BSE crisis. From the late 80s until last month, he was chief medical officer, first in Scotland, then England. He had access to ministers and was the country's chief advisor on health. For years, he said beef was safe for us to eat.
The theoretical risk is there, but we have no evidence whatsoever that there is any risk or any link at all between BSE and CJD.
He said this because there was no scientific evidence otherwise, and in the belief laws banning contaminated meat reaching the food chain throughout the 1990s were being enforced. But in October 1995 he received a bombshell, a letter from the Ministry of Agriculture admitting this was not the case. In written evidence, Sir Kenneth says he was extremely concerned. He says senior Ministry of Agriculture officials understated the importance of this. He found the attitude of those responsible for removing potentially contaminated meat, namely the farming industry and slaughterhouse owners and operators, astonishing. Sir Kenneth could no longer claim that infected meat was not reaching the human food chain. A cabinet meeting he was at considered slaughtering the entire British herd. At the same time, people like 30-year-old Maurice Callaghan were dying of new variant CJD, and within months the link with BSE-infected beef was established. His brother condemns today's statement, which shows health officials critical of colleagues in the Ministry of Agriculture.
At what stage in all of this do we get an admission from individuals in government departments or from government departments themselves that they're responsible for these deaths?
Sir Kenneth also accuses the Ministry of Agriculture of drafting press releases he deemed inappropriately reassuring. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News.
Last-ditch talks are continuing tonight in Belgrade between the Serbian leader Slobodan Milosevic and the American Special Envoy Richard Holbrooke to try to resolve the crisis over Kosovo. NATO is threatening airstrikes unless Serbia complies with United Nations demands to withdraw its troops from Kosovo. 90% of the province's population are of Albanian descent and want more control over their own affairs. Our special correspondent Ben Brown is in Belgrade.
After a week of hectic shuttle diplomacy, the American envoy Richard Holbrooke is exhausted, but he keeps himself going with orange juice and strong coffee. And today he and his key advisors prepared for a showdown meeting with President Milosevic.
Slow down.
Mr. Holbrooke told us he had come to Belgrade with a 6-point ultimatum, which the Serbian leader can either accept or reject and be bombed by NATO.
There's been no change in the situation since I saw you last. It remains extremely serious. NATO continues in intensifying planning in preparation for action, and we are continuing an intensifying diplomatic effort to see if that is going to be necessary or not.
Mr. Holbrooke is the diplomat who helped bring peace to Bosnia. Now he's trying to bring it to Kosovo. But he and Mr. Milosevic are playing an extraordinary game of brinkmanship. Today's meeting is absolutely critical, and Mr. Holbrooke will need all his legendary skills of tough-talking diplomacy to persuade President Milosevic to back down. And he had a trick up his sleeve to drive home NATO's threats. Mr. Holbrooke went into today's talks with a 3-star Air Force commander at his side, Lieutenant General Michael Short, the man who has selected which targets NATO will hit and who has around 400 aircraft at his disposal. NATO's forces are deployed on land and on sea within easy striking distance of Serbia. The alliance's warplanes and cruise missiles are less than an hour's flying time from their potential targets. But the Serbs are well equipped with ground-to-air missile defences, which NATO will have to disable or destroy. Airfields will provide more prime targets, along with command and control bases, weapons depots, and ultimately infrastructure like roads and bridges. But NATO insist they will minimise the risk of civilian casualties. Today's set of talks were the 4th this week between Mr. Milosevic and Mr. Holbrooke. They are continuing tonight, and they're said to be very difficult and delicate. But the Serbs are making threats of their own, vowing they will defend themselves if attacked.
Of course, if you are threatened with airstrikes, of course, I think you are entitled to defend yourself because we are a sovereign country. This is not a territory of some kind. You are invited to invade.
The Serbs do have a substantial air force of their own, and today their Deputy Prime Minister issued a chilling warning that while NATO troops may enter his country, they will leave it in coffins. Ben Brown, BBC News, Belgrade.
NATO has finalised details of a timetable leading up to possible military action against Serbia, just as the military alliance seems to be nearing agreement that action can be justified legally. The United States is urging NATO to give the order which would put its forces on standby for airstrikes. Once the instruction is given, possibly on Monday, it's thought there will be 2 days breathing space to allow one last attempt to settle the crisis peacefully. But there are still doubts within NATO about whether the airstrike should go ahead. Our diplomatic correspondent James Robbins reports.
President Clinton is turning up the heat on Serbia by threatening to use B-2 stealth bombers against them. Invisible to radar, they can strike 16 targets at once. Each aircraft costs well over £1 billion, and it's never been used in combat before. The president says the Serbian leader still has time to act and avoid bombing.
He can still keep the commitments that he made to President Yeltsin and keep the commitments inherent in the UN resolution, and none of this will happen. But I'm convinced that it's important that we authorize NATO to act.
And the president believes the international tide is now running in favour of force. His visitor today, the new German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, came off the fence and now backs NATO airstrikes, shifting the split in the alliance firmly towards consensus. So how are NATO countries lining up on the issue of striking Serbia? In Germany, the question of airstrikes is the biggest test for the new government, which relies on support from the Greens. So the original offer of 14 Luftwaffe fighters may not get past the German parliament. But for NATO, Germany's passive support is quite enough. Italy's support cannot be guaranteed. Tonight there's no government in Rome, after yet another was swept away in parliament. But Italy is home to the main Allied air bases, and it will need more diplomacy to win the Italians round. But among other NATO countries, the parliaments of Holland and Denmark voted this week that their air forces will take part. And France, too, has thrown its weight behind any NATO airstrikes. The biggest opposition comes from outside the alliance, from Russia, arguing that NATO action needs another UN decision first. And at NATO, the Russians were arguing their case again today. But most in the military alliance now agree no more UN authority is needed. The threat of humanitarian catastrophe in Kosovo gives NATO the legal base it needs.
The political leadership of NATO and the nations of this alliance have made clear that they expect and indeed demand his full compliance.
There's no doubt now the Americans believe NATO will be in political agreement to launch any airstrikes after Monday. This Canadian squadron of F-18s was among the forces on high alert today.
At this moment, we're reviewing all the different options that are available for us, ensuring that our pilots are fully ready to go.
And that's precisely the message the backers of force want Serbia to hear and to heed. James Robbins, BBC News.
The government says it wants to boost the starting rate of pay for nurses, but it's also warned that the health service must be able to afford any increase. The comments were made in a submission to the nurses' pay review body. Earlier, the government denied a report that it aimed to limit any pay rise to 2.5% in line with inflation.
The government has not suggested a figure for the nurses' pay increase next year. However, it says repeatedly in its evidence to the pay review body that it should be fair but affordable. Ministers recognise that with 8,000 nursing vacancies and more staff leaving all the time, action is needed to make the job more attractive.
The government has said to the review bodies that we want to see a fair pay deal for nurses, but that's got to be affordable to the National Health Service. So the pay review body will have to look at a pay award that aids the recruitment, the retention and the motivation of nurses, but is also consistent with the government hitting its inflation target.
In particular, ministers want to boost the starting rate of pay for nurses, saying this would have a positive impact on the image of the profession. But staff at London's St Thomas's Hospital feel they've been let down by successive governments over pay.
I just think we're really fed up, basically, with the amount of responsibility we have to take on at such a young age. We're expected to take on so much extra study, and we just don't get any recognition for it, basically.
It's crisis, and they need to act now. They need to listen to what the nurses are saying, they need to listen to what the trade unions are saying, and they need to react, because if they don't, the crisis is going to get worse.
It's all talk, no do, basically. I think was waiting for something actually to happen.
It'll be 4 months before the results of the pay round are known. The government wants to ensure that nurses' pay awards don't swallow up extra resources earmarked for heart disease, cancer and mental health. There was enormous anger back in January when Labour's first pay settlement to nurses gave them a below-inflation increase for the second year running. So not surprisingly, Britain's 500,000 nurses are wary of talk from ministers now about rewarding them with a fair but affordable increase. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, at St Thomas's Hospital in London.
The Conservative conference in Bournemouth has ended with a rallying call from the Deputy Leader, Peter Lilly, for the party to show that it's caring and generous. He also predicted that the Tories were coming back and could win the next election. But the new chairman, Michael Ancram, told party members that the road back to power was a hard one and not for the faint-hearted.
Gifts to enjoy in retirement for the departing Conservative chairman Cecil Parkinson. The man who'd headed the election success in 1983 had returned to help repair the crashed vehicle of the Tory party after the last election. Getting the vehicle back on the road in Bournemouth hasn't been easy. But while William Hague said today that MEPs thinking of quitting the party should go sooner rather than later, he believed they'd made real progress.
And that puts us in a far stronger position with most people in this country than having different people giving different views all the time as we had through the last election. So we've got that settled, I'm glad we've got it settled, and now we're going on to these other issues.
No Conservative conference in recent years has been spared a Labour-mocking ditty from Peter Lilly, now the party's deputy leader. Today it was his personal version of Land of Hope and Glory.
And it goes like this. Land of chattering classes, no more pageantry. Darlings, raise your glasses to brave modernity.
But Mr. Lilly did too attempt to rally the Tory troops in a more conventional way, promising to fight against a nanny state in Britain and a super-state in Europe.
The Conservatives are listening to Britain and we're coming back. The Conservatives are renewing policies and we're coming back. The Conservatives are coming back.
For the finale, the representatives enjoyed a more orthodox version of their favourite tune. They've been given some themes and battle cries this week. Next year, they'll be expecting more detail on the policies too. The Tories came to Bournemouth hoping to draw a line under their European squabbles. They didn't manage it this week, and some arguments will go on. But with a year of elections ahead, and with life getting tougher for the government, their leaders hope they can now concentrate on taking the fight to their political opponents instead. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Bournemouth.
The Prime Minister has dismissed a suggestion by one of his ministers, Clare Short, that President Clinton isn't fit to be in office after the disclosures about his affair with Monica Lewinsky. The International Development Secretary said on the BBC Question Time programme that Mr Clinton had told too many lies to stay in office. Tony Bliar has repeatedly stated his public support for the President. A hospital in Bristol has admitted that a 73-year-old patient died when he was mistakenly given blood intended for another man with a similar name. The dead man, Philip James, was given blood which was intended for a patient called James Philip. Southmead Hospital has apologised and said it had retrained staff. The supermarket chain Asda has become the first major retailer to cut salt levels in many of its foods. Doctors say that reducing the amount of salt we eat by a third could save thousands of lives each year. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has named the controversial right-winger Ariel Sharon as his new foreign minister. The appointment comes just days before a crucial peace summit in Washington, which aims to secure a peace deal with the Palestinians. Today in Israel, a woman soldier was stabbed to death, and in Hebron on the West Bank, 20 Palestinians were injured in fighting after the funeral of a man who was shot by Israeli soldiers.
Amjad Nache, who was 21 when he was killed by an Israeli soldier, was given a martyr's funeral in Hebron this morning. He was the latest Palestinian victim of the dangerous and tense state of no war, no peace that has been going on here now for 18 months. Michal Adato, a 19-year-old army corporal, was the latest Israeli victim. She was stabbed to death by a Palestinian this morning as she got off a bus. Stopping this waste of life by reviving the peace process will be the top priority at the Washington summit between Israel and the Palestinians next week. Ariel Sharon, Israel's new foreign minister, will be there. As defense minister, he masterminded the invasion of Lebanon in 1982, but he was forced to resign after Israel's Christian allies massacred hundreds of Palestinian refugees. This morning, Jewish settlers in Hebron, extreme religious nationalists, were campaigning to stop any compromises with the Palestinians. But other Israelis hope Sharon's been appointed because, with his tough reputation, he can persuade the hard right to allow the government to make a deal. On the streets, there were clashes. Palestinian leaders warn they can't contain their people's frustration indefinitely. The Israelis, on high alert, have told their soldiers to expect something much worse than stones. The violence suits extremists on both sides who believe in victory rather than in peace. But there are plenty of other Palestinians and Israelis who are not extremists, who long ago lost faith in the ability of the negotiators to deliver them peace or security. They're very cynical about the chances for an improvement in their lives at next week's summit. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Hebron.
Here, a retired postman from Yorkshire, who has accused the government of sex discrimination, has had his case referred to the European Court of Justice. John Taylor says it's unfair that women qualify for winter fuel payments at the age of 60, while men have to wait till they're 65. Any change in payments could affect more than 1 million people.
63-year-old John Taylor is facing a cold Yorkshire winter with no help towards his fuel bills from the government. Payments are linked to the state pension, which he's not entitled to for another 2 years. Women can get both benefits when they're 60. He believes that's sex discrimination, which breaks European law. Today in London at the High Court, he emerged satisfied, having succeeded in getting his case referred to the European Court of Justice. But that could take 2 years, by which time he'd be 65 anyway. He says the government should concede now.
I'm challenging the government to accept defeat now and pay everybody winter fuel payments.
It's interesting that the government have come forward themselves and proposed that this case goes to the European Court. They would usually fight that happening, and they would want to win the case in the court here, but they've come along and said we think this should go to Europe. But I think it shows some uncertainty whether the regulations are lawful.
An afternoon at the day centre allows elderly people to keep warm at someone else's expense. Winter fuel payments are worth £20 to a pensioner living alone, and that can make all the difference. Whatever the final outcome of the case, campaigners for pension equality have the comfort of knowing that they've already won the battle in the long term. By the year 2020, the government will have equalised the state retirement age. The bad news for women, especially those born after 1955, is that it's being raised to 65 for everyone. Kim Catcheside, BBC News at Age Concern in North London.
A tide of violence in South Africa's remote farming country is threatening hopes of reconciliation between blacks and whites. More than 500 white farmers have been murdered since the end of the apartheid era, and Nelson Mandela is meeting farmers tomorrow to tackle the problem. But campaigners for black farm workers say they're continuing to suffer from violence by their white bosses. Our Africa correspondent Jane Stanley reports from South Africa's northern province.
Dawn to dusk, 6 days a week, for less than £4. Little has changed since the days of apartheid. Black labourers are beaten, shot and even killed by some white farmers. Whites are still the boss, owning nearly all South Africa's agricultural land and providing most jobs. Josephine prefers to scrape by on her own tiny plot than work for a white farmer. One punched, kicked and stripped her for no apparent reason. She was then forced to lie in a coffin.
I'm still afraid, even now. Just thinking of what he did makes me upset, makes me tremble. I thought he was going to kill me.
White farmers are stepping up security as resentment grows. They're barricading even public roads on their land, restricting entry. It's hard for Mark Vegeriff to get onto the Vass farms. His job is to tell black workers that they have rights. But just his presence and ours is enough to make the farmers nervous.
I believe you've got a problem here. You see the way you...
They're more comfortable discussing attacks on white farmers than on black workers.
They've proved that they're not willing to change. They've proved that they want to maintain the status quo as it is. And I think the government has to intervene more strongly. When farm workers try and organize or unionize, the response is that they get dismissed, they get evicted from their farms, they become more victims of intimidation and so on from the farm owners.
The desperate poverty of rural South Africa is breeding lawlessness. The government blames common criminality for the increasingly frequent attacks on white farmers, but it pushes the policy of reconciliation. There's no research into the number of revenge killings. 19-year-old Radzilani hasn't forgiven the white farmer who chased and shot him when he asked for his overdue wages. He's bitter that he got nothing approaching justice from going to the white-dominated police and courts.
I'm very angry. He told them that he thought he was shooting at a wild pig, but he fired directly at me. He called me an animal, and they didn't punish him really.
The next generation of black farmers has heard the government's promises that land is to be redistributed, but it may be too late for today's abused labourers. No official statistics are even being kept about attacks on black farm workers. They remain as disadvantaged and vulnerable as ever. The dream of liberation in the new South Africa has for them not even come close to being fulfilled. Jane Stanley, BBC News, in South Africa's northern province.
The Prime Minister has rejected a suggestion that he's failed to defend human rights and democracy in China for the sake of British business contacts there. Mr. Blair, who's been in Hong Kong on the final leg of his visit to China, was responding to comments from the Hong Kong pro-democracy leader, Martin Lee.
Gloomy weather, gloomy economic outlook. But having had a remarkably successful trip to China, both in terms of diplomacy and trade, Mr. Blair was using his photo opportunities here to accentuate the positive, in this case a joint venture with Hong Kong on the buses. Now relieved of the difficult task of governing Hong Kong, Britain has reached a much better relationship with Hong Kong's new masters. And when Mr. Blair met C.H. Tung, China's selected chief executive of Hong Kong, he was able to say that China had, to a large extent, kept its promises about not interfering here. It's noticeable, for instance, that the Hong Kong press has become much more robust about criticizing the local government, and no one stops it. It's still early days, but so far the handover agreement seems to be working. The next photo call was more difficult. Martin Lee, many people feel, is the democratic conscience of Hong Kong. The Chinese and British governments both see him as more of a gadfly, an irritant. He accused Mr. Blair of failing to protest sufficiently about human rights during his China visit.
I don't like foreign visitors to Beijing to do anything or to say anything to the Beijing leaders which will make our work even more difficult. Unfortunately, we don't seem to find any support from the British government either to quicken the pace of democratization for Hong Kong.
With the greatest respect to Martin, he was accusing me of not raising human rights before I came, and he accepted that he hadn't actually read the speeches or the interviews in which I had raised the issue. If what people want me to do is to say, we want to wreck Britain's relations with China, well, I'm not into that. Because
he'd stick right. Leadership is
of England's European Championship qualifier against Bulgaria at Wembley tomorrow. The other home nations are also in action. Scotland play Estonia, Wales travel to Denmark, and Northern Ireland meet Finland.
For the England coach Glenn Hoddle, already pondering the absence of key players for tomorrow's match against Bulgaria, news of the 8-month ban for Paul Ince was worse than team officials had feared and deprives them of one of their most experienced players at a crucial time. UEFA's decision to suspend Ince for 3 matches after his sending off in the match with Sweden, when he made comments to the referee as he left the pitch, sends a clear message to others. England have finished their last 2 games with 10 men. David Beckham remains suspended after that now infamous dismissal in the World Cup against Argentina. Hoddle accepts it's time to tighten up on discipline.
I think we've got to be determined, but we've got to make sure that we're disciplined as well at Wembley and get the result and get back onto ending the game with 11 players. It certainly gives you a better chance, doesn't it?
Although Glenn Hoddle is understandably coy about his future prospects, nothing less than maximum points will be acceptable from the next 2 games, and the pressures are self-evident. Pressure too for a Scotland team facing matches with Estonia and the Faroe Islands and hoping to reach a 3rd successive European finals despite serious injury problems.
We've virtually lost a team, but we're quite resilient, we're used to it. The players who come in will get the opportunity, and I'm sure they'll seize it with both hands.
The Scots will rely on the former Rangers pairing of Ali McCoist and Ian Durrant, now so successful at Kilmarnock, to provide the goals. Paul Newman, BBC News.
And the main news tonight, the former Chief Medical Officer, Sir Kenneth Kalman, has criticised the Ministry of Agriculture's handling of the BSE crisis. From the 9 o'clock news, good night.
Good evening from News West. A hospital in Bristol has admitted that an elderly patient died when he was given the wrong type of blood in a mix-up over names. Philip James from Clevedon was mistakenly given blood intended for another patient at Southmead Hospital called James Philip. Details of the mix-up were given at an inquest.
73-year-old Philip James needed a transfusion after an operation. What he got was blood destined for James Philip.
This is an inexcusable error, and the public are going to be deeply concerned that something like this could happen to somebody in a hospital.
Tonight, the Southmead Health Services Trust said it deeply regretted the mix-up. All 250 staff here are to undergo retraining.
The ward staff took the wrong blood from one of our issue fridges. They did that, unfortunately, because the names of the 2 patients were very similar. The procedures at the ward level were not as good as they should have been. And the staff made a mistake. One has to be honest and admit that.
An inquest has already heard details of this case and recorded a verdict of accidental death. It's understood 2 nurses at this hospital who were on duty the day the mix-up occurred were suspended but have since been reinstated, having agreed to retraining. The family of Mr. James have so far made no comment.
A mother and her 4-year-old son have been killed in a freak accident on the M5 in Gloucestershire. Yasmin Zalam and Kamran Zalam were hit by a car as they stood on a grass verge. The woman's husband and their 4 other children saw the accident from inside their car.
As the breakdown crew prepared to take away one of the cars involved, there was little outward sign of the tragedy that had just unfolded. Moments before, the elderly driver of this Fiat Uno and her daughter had been on their way home from Birmingham Airport. One theory is she suffered a violent sneezing fit, which caused her to lose control. As the vehicle careered off the carriageway, it ran along the grass verge, hitting a mother and her 4-year-old son.
Inquiries will continue, but the police seem prepared to accept this was a tragic accident and that no one is likely to be charged as a result. Tonight, a spokesman for Gloucestershire Police repeated the warning to motorists only to leave their cars on the motorway in extreme circumstances. Graham Gardner, BBC News West on the M5.
In football, Swindon Town played their second game under the guidance of new manager Jimmy Quinn tonight. With just a few minutes to go, the latest score we have is Swindon 3, Huddersfield 0. Well, finally tonight, the autumn colours of the changing trees at Westonbirt Arboretum in Gloucestershire are a stunning sight at this time of year. And for the next few weeks, visitors are in for a treat for their ears too. Musician Roger Winfield has set up an orchestra at the Arboretum using harps to create magical, eerie sounds when the wind blows. The orchestra in the trees will be playing at weekends and on Wednesdays for the rest of the month. Well, that's all from us for tonight. Now a look at the weather with John Kettley. From us here, good night.
Good evening to you. Well, rain's going to be high on the agenda over the coming weekend, and it'll often be pretty windy too. That's the first batch of rain moving across the southeastern quarter of England just at the moment, and then we run back into a straightforward run of northwesterly winds, that's to say sunshine and a scattering of showers during Saturday, before the next batch of wind and rain sweeps in from the Atlantic during Saturday night and through much of Sunday morning as well. Well, here's the first finger of rain. It's quite intense. It's a narrow band, but even so it's pretty wet, and it's still moving across East Anglia, southeast England and down towards the Channel Islands. That band of rain moving away from Kent probably in the second half of the night, and the legacy being a mixture of showers and clear skies. The showers quite blustery too, feeding on a stiff northwesterly wind. In the shelter of the wind we could see temperatures down to about 5 to 7 degrees, but facing the wind on the coast probably no lower than 9 or 10. So that's how we're looking tomorrow then, with this northwesterly wind right the way down across the country, a mixture of sunshine and showers. I think in the morning most of the showers will be in the west and over Scotland, but during the course of the day I think many of the showers in the west will fade away, a few more developing to the east, and by the end of the afternoon just 1 or 2 left in northeastern Scotland, more likely through East Anglia and southeast England, by which time the cloud will be racing in from the Atlantic, so very little sunshine left in the west by the middle part of the afternoon. And temperature wise about 14, but feeling a bit chilly I think in that fairly stiff northwesterly. And then during Saturday evening we'll find the rain piling in across Northern Ireland, some wet and windy weather to come there, and that rain extending further north up the western side of Scotland by about midnight. And then that rain's going to be piling in across the rest of Scotland through England and Wales on Saturday night and into Sunday morning, and probably the residual rain still left across the extreme southeast even through the middle part of Sunday afternoon. Now most places will see an improvement through the day, some blustery showers and some strong winds too, and temperatures around about 13 to 15 degrees. The unsettled theme continues into next week as well. A lot of tram lines across the country on Monday. That's to say more showers or longer spells of rain in the north, the best in the south. And that's it from me. Enjoy the weekend.
A serious crime.
I don't need to tell you just how important it is we catch this man.
With no answers.
Any reason why someone might want to kill Margaret?
And a weapon.
You know what the stain on the knife is, sir?
Which had the solution.
I think you'll find that's the one.
The criminals you helped put away.
Charge him.
And the crimes you helped to solve. Crimewatch File, Tuesday, 10 o'clock on BBC One.
This Sunday, practice makes perfect in Ballykissangel.
Relax, Father. It's not the Eurovision Song Contest. You're kidding me.
And in a network premiere, Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman and Gwyneth Paltrow star in Seven.
It's impressive to see a man feeding off his emotions.
Look out for Sunday night on BBC One.
BBC Two's Comedy Zone continues now as Joe Brand and actor-singer Matthew Marsden test their musical minds in Never Mind the Buzzcocks. The nation's favourite comic poem is revealed here on BBC One tonight. Griff Rhys-Jones has the results of your votes at 10:25. First on BBC One, a tragic accident. Or was it?